copy the right, but actually goes on pragmatism. Mr. Tobe, please.
Yeah, I don't share the opinion that we are going away from our values or fundamental rights. I think that is clear if you go through the text. I mean, I can respect that we have colleagues in this House that are not happy with the result, and they might not even support the migration pact. But for me, this really comes down to, I think, the time for speeches about migration is over. We know all the speeches, and we have listened to them for many, many years now. And it could be from populist parties, or it could be from others. And this really comes down to, do you want to have a proper European solution or not? That is basically what this comes down to. And of course, there are some proposals we would like to have seen in another way from the European Parliament. But we achieve the big things. We achieved that we will finally have all member states in. We will finally have everyone taking some kind of responsibility. Yes, it is flexible. Yes, it is voluntary. But it will mean a lot. We will finally work together, and I think that is the most important thing today.
If you may, I would argue the simplification of the assumption that this package would be ideologically oriented or serving the purpose of the extreme right. On the contrary. First of all, when we're talking about binding rules, we're talking about binding rules of all the member states, regardless the political color or orientation of the relevant governments in place. And believe me, there are many, because migration and asylum have proved the most divisive issue in the European agenda. What are we doing here? Precisely, we are coming up with a European scale of response, which is exactly the opposite of the ultimate agenda of the far right, which is precisely going national, going back to national. That is a dystopia, not only because it ignores the rules on which the European area of liberty, justice and security is founded, including the rule of fair shared responsibility and solidarity when it comes to migration and asylum policy and lawmaking, but also the very idea of a European scale of response. That is actually the positive side of this whole thing. And let me add something. If I hear some opinions that they are not happy with this package or with this agreement and the compromises underlying, I would argue that is precisely the point. None of us is happy. But when you come to a negotiating round in which you see a variety of political groups, and you see 27 member states represented in the Council, and you see a sequence of rotating presidency making points on behalf of two institutions which are to be put in line if we want to have European legislation, that is precisely the point of compromising. No one can come out from this negotiation entirely happy. No one can have it its own way. But it's absolutely untrue that this package denies EU values. On the contrary, it reaffirms EU values, including fundamental rights, precisely because we are finally putting in place legislation which is binding for all the member states, including human rights, fundamental rights considerations. And that is precisely the aim of this whole negotiation we're coming from, and that is the difference we're making. Because the situation where we're coming from is precisely a situation of anomia, a situation in which member states have been inclined or even incited to act on their own, with individual, fragmented, non-systemic reactions, instead of a European system of response, which is the one we're trying to put in place here.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Vous posez la question d'un projet qui reprendrait les propositions de l'extrême droite. Moi, j'ai bien regardé, j'ai pas vu beaucoup de membres du groupe ID présents dans les négociations. Ils dénoncent les problèmes, mais sont absents pour construire des solutions. C'est normal, ils se nourrissent du problème. Sur le fond, ces textes ont un vrai équilibre, un checks and balances, entre l'organisation, la fixation de règles qu'on applique. Moi, j'ai un règlement qui est un règlement qui réglemente les procédures, leurs délais, leurs rigueurs. Oui, toutes les personnes qui vont entrer sur le territoire européen de manière irrégulière seront enregistrées. Nous devons savoir qui est sur notre territoire. Mais ces personnes auront aussi des droits, je les ai décrits tout à l'heure, je les rappelle, une aide juridique dans l'ensemble de la phase de l'asile et le monitoring des droits fondamentaux pour qu'ils soient réels. Gérer plus rapidement les personnes qui ont très peu de chances d'avoir l'asile, c'est aussi faire que nos systèmes d'asile soient moins encombrés par des personnes nombreuses qui attendent des délais beaucoup trop longs, qui sont en fait inhumains, qui leur sont imposés. Gérer des procédures efficacement, complètement, mais avec rigueur. C'est aussi faire en sorte qu'il y ait à un moment donné moins de personnes présentes dans les procédures, et donc qu'elles puissent être mieux accueillies, mieux respectées. Enfin, il y a un point assez important qui est la question de la mise en œuvre de ces règles. Les règles, c'est bien. La réalité, le suivi, la pratique de leur mise en œuvre sera essentielle. Et nous, au Parlement européen, nous nous sommes engagés à assurer un suivi, déjà dans la phase préparatoire, parce qu'il y a un différé dans l'application des règlements, puis ensuite dans la mise en œuvre des textes. C'est la réalité vécue par les personnes qui sera tout à fait centrale.
We have another question in the room, please. Go ahead.
Markus Becker with Der Spiegel. My colleague mentioned it earlier that a big number of experts are saying that this reform will change little on the ground. But let's assume for a second they're all wrong, and it will change a lot. Still, you already mentioned it, Madam President, for example, that these rules will have to be implemented next year by the Belgian presidency. It will take time. So what exactly do you think will change on the ground that will convince people before the European elections that this is a reform that shows the EU works, and this is not a reform that does not work, where the right-wing parties could seize on that fact and say, see people, they are agreed on this reform and nothing changes on the ground, so vote for us.
So, for me, on this, my colleague said it in the responses to the previous question. I mean, we are here to build rather than destroy. We face in this Parliament, but also we see it in different national, situations, where the extremes of the political spectrum would vote against anything, simply because for them it is better as their platform for the European elections to say that they are against rather than they are for. 2019, all of us were candidates then, was not an easy election campaign, because precisely then we needed to face the fact that from a legislative perspective, and let's not forget this is our core role, we had not managed to find a deal with the Council and spent years saying that the situation is blocked and who's to blame and which group could have done better, etc. This is not the case today, and I think we should welcome this today. It is a historic day, not for nothing, that you had, after years of deadlock, light, I would say, at the end of the tunnel. And this brings those five presidencies into the spectrum, because these five presidencies are also led by prime ministers or presidents that will go into the European elections and say, we worked on migration and made a deal. Now, changing on the ground, what I would wish, I would tell you, is that we would have less situations where leaders of countries find no option but to go it alone, where they feel excluded and their citizens feel that there's no European solution. Search and rescue was mentioned, avoiding deaths was mentioned. 10 years ago, we had Lampedusa tragedy. How have we made sure that smugglers will no longer continue to have such a profitable business? When you have the possibility of member states working together, at the moment, they find themselves in a situation where they present themselves with an influx at their border, an internal one, and they close it. This pact aims to resolve that, and that is not nothing. 7 pieces of legislation, actually 8, even if we refer, for example, to Eurodac, which has been on hold for a very long time, finally a deal on it. In order also for it to be balanced with our aims as a parliament, is something that was important for frontline member states, but also important for member states that are, let's say, on the secondary step of receiving migrants. Where do we go next? How do we talk to our neighbouring third countries? Agreements that are made with them. This is all the next step that would not have been possible without this pact. And I think that rather than today give a platform to those who are saying that this is not a good enough deal, to those that are saying that this will not work, because that will go straight into the laps of those who precisely don't want it to work, because they run election campaigns on populist intolerance rhetoric. And that's not something that this stage is shared by. And we, my colleagues, represent the 3 groups in the House, but have also found majorities in this House that will hopefully, we need to work on, a majority in the plenary in the spring, in order for us to go just before the elections with a vote that is strong, that is clear, and that is reflected by a vote in the Council that is strong and that is clear, because governments also need to play their part. But as co-legislators, we have done ours, and I think we should be proud of it.
Mr. López Aguilar,
yes, please. You've raised a very challenging question, and I will be particularly blunt. This mandate started in 2019, and for good reason. This European Parliament requested Ursula von der Leyen, in order to be invested President of the forthcoming Commission, to come up with an actual European common asylum system. The situation where we're coming from was a situation where there were directives in place and one regulation, the so-called Dublin regulation, which lies the responsibility of not only granting international protection or asylum to the country of first entry, but the whole responsibility of the procedure and the services entailed to the country of first entry, which led to a dynamic of a continuation of rebuttals and even arguments within the Council that I have seen live representing the European Parliament in the Council of Ministers of Justice on the grounds of so-called secondary movements. Then we actually asked for a system which is now coming in regulations, which are particularly binding legislative acts for all the member states directly. They don't need transposition. And you know what? We're overcoming Dublin, because now that rule of simply lying the whole responsibility on the country of first entry is going to be superseded by RAM, by the regulation of asylum migration. That is a difference. And you know what? I'm coming from the Canary Islands, and whenever there is a search and rescue operation, which is an everyday situation in the Canaries, because believe me, they come by thousands every weekend in the Canaries, the whole response lies on Spain, and the whole solidarity lies on the Spanish internal solidarity we call derivation programs. And you know what? From now on, facing a search and rescue operation, there will be a European scale of response. Finally, there will be a relocation program, European scale, not only Spanish relocation program called derivation. That is a difference. That is a huge difference. You're asking what is going to change? This is a change. Regulations which are binding, which don't need transposition, don't need 2 years of transposing directives, and again a dynamic of appeals before the European Court of Justice for those countries in violation of their obligations to comply with the directives is going to be effective once they are finally adopted. And the whole system, consisting of 5 regulations, is going to make a difference. Of course, needless to say, that at a European scale, there is no such thing as a miracle overnight. It's not going to happen in 24 hours. but certainly it's going to make a difference as to the situation we're coming from.
Peut-être très rapidement, oui.
Just very briefly, if I may.
Et merci d'avoir envisagé cette hypothèse. L'idée vraiment, le principe fondamental, c'est d'entrer dans une autre organisation de l'asile et de la migration. La question, c'est pas de répondre à un problème. L'asile et la migration, c'est une réalité de l'humanité depuis toujours. Donc, le défi, et ce que nous avons pris en main ici, c'est l'idée de la gérer en européen. Et plus chacun à l'échelle nationale avec des éléments européens. C'est vraiment en européen. Et le défi de la mise en œuvre concrète de ce pacte, c'est qu'effectivement les procédures soient plus efficaces, qu'on ait de meilleures conditions d'accueil, que les droits des personnes soient mieux respectés. Et aux 50 ONG que vous évoquez, qui dénoncent aujourd'hui certains aspects du pacte, nous les connaissons, elles travaillent sur le terrain, on a dialogué avec elles, moi-même j'ai fait une évaluation pendant un an de Dublin. On sait bien que le système actuel n'est pas satisfaisant. Donc oui, nous voulons sortir d'un certain nombre de dysfonctionnements et de situations humaines extrêmement difficiles. J'ai envie de leur proposer de nous aider, de nous accompagner dans ces temps de construction, il y aura un temps intermédiaire de préparation de la mise en application des textes, ensemble de construire une bonne application rigoureuse et totalement respectueuse des droits de l'homme. Elle est prévue pour ça. On a besoin de, par exemple, le legal counseling. On nous dit, oh là là, on ne trouvera pas tous les conseils, etc. Si on peut, avec les ONG, travailler pour qu'il y ait des possibilités concrètes de mise à disposition de personnes, d'associations qui puissent leur délivrer ce conseil, alors on aura progressé dans l'effectivité du droit des migrants à connaître le système juridique et l'ensemble de leurs droits.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make one thing clear from my side. This has never, for me, been about a strategy for the next European election, or that we have a rise of populist parties in Europe. For me, this has been on the content that we need a European migration policy. And I think that is also important to remember. And I would also say, we will see in the vote later on, I think with the three responsible groups that you can see up here today, we will work hard to get even more support. We might even also get support from some responsible parties, also from the ECR group. Let's see. I think the most important thing here is content, and it's the division if you want to have a European migration policy or not. That is what this will be about, and that is what's going to be clear in the vote, I would say, in plenary.
We have now a few more questions online. I will group them. So please, I will ask you to say who you're addressing the question to. Please, Maria Sara.
Hello, thanks for the floor. I hope you hear me. Maria Sara with FC Newspaper Greece. I have two questions. The first is for Mrs. Keller. I wanted you to confirm if it is true that the first-line countries will be required to build prison-like reception centres on their borders to register migrants and process their asylum claims. Will Greece need to build even more? Because now we have facilitation centres for migrants that arrive to the Greek islands. Should Greece, for example, build another building like a prison for the people that will not be identified as asylum seekers? And the second question is more political. I think that Madam Metsola, President Metsola, could answer how the European Parliament would press the Commission and the Member States to implement this new law, because we have seen in the past problems with the implementation of for example, rule of law conditionality. Member States will try to avoid the implementation of this law. So how would the European Parliament press the Member States to implement it? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And we also have Philippe Cousin. Please, Philippe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is, well, your best guess when it comes to when you think the main parts of the pact will be implemented and put into practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a last one by Eleonora Vasquez. Eleonora, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Eleonora Vasquez from Euractiv. I have a question to Mr. Aguilar. If in the non-state actor definition was were exempted NGOs. One question for Mr. Tobé on the solidarity pool, if it is confirmed that that the information of the solidarity pool, so how member states will contribute and how, will be classified information, so we will not have the possibility to see it. And one last question for Mr. Keller, Mrs. Keller, about the possibility of detention during the border procedure. And one last question, actually, for President Metsola on the political approach and the political environment around the pact. Do you think this deal was affected by the election period? Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor to the President now.
Yeah, so I will answer two questions, one by Ms. Psara and one by Ms. Vasquez. So how will the European Parliament press the Commission? We will do our job. Huh? We always do our job. You have seen it over the past years. First, where we ask the questions that need to be asked, we push where it needs to be pushed. This was the first demand that we put to the incoming Commission in 2019, that we needed a pact that revisits the deadlock and tries to unblock it, and that's where we are at. Today is really a day which shows and puts paid to the Parliament's role, not only as co-legislator but also as one of scrutiny and inquiry. There will always be member states that either try to push back the deadline or try not to implement. But this is legislation and there's a procedure for that. The Commission is guardian of the treaties, it's guardian of the implementation of legislation, and therefore where member states do not implement, then there are measures that are taken as in any other instrument. But I would turn it around. Today you hear, and I was present last week, the European Council, where most of my exchange was dominated by the Migration Pact, that there is a real desire by those prime ministers and presidents' heads sitting around the table to have this pact, to have had an agreement, because they themselves put their European political agenda on this line, because they are against, they are along the years having had to push against the narrative of better to destroy than to build. So Thomas said it earlier, the time for speeches is over, now is the time to implement, and I think it's in the interest of member states to look into really the possibility of having this migration policy that all of us as political representatives that want and believe in Europe have promised to work on. On the political approach, we had a deadline set, which is the end of 2023. This will leave us with the next few months on final sort of legal scrubbing, looking at the recitals, etc., making sure that from a legal linguistic point of view, but also final versions of the texts will match and will be able to be implemented with a vote before the elections. We were pressed for time, of course, but there is no better way than to say that we recognise the urgency and we pushed until we managed. So we will continue to do that until the very end of this mandate, to go to an election campaign with quite a lot of successes underneath our belt, as we would say in English.
Madame Keller, if you want to reply to the questions.
Oui, concernant la personne, la journaliste grecque,
the Greek journalist
la
who asked the question, first of all,
reception
now the
centers
construction
dans les pays de
of
première
reception
entrée.
centres in the countries of first entrance,
Well,
indeed, it will be necessary to have
pour pouvoir
some
réaliser
reception
le screening
centre to
et pour
carry out the
accueillir les
screening
personnes dans le
to
cadre de la zone d'attente
people.
qui est
It will
prévue,
be in the
fiction
waiting
of
area.
non-entry, pour les personnes qui suivront la procédure
for
aux
those
frontières.
people who will
Mais
follow
ces
the border procedure.
Structures ne seront pas forcément physiquement à la frontière, puisqu'elles auront besoin de personnel compétent, des éducateurs, des gardiens, des policiers, pour faire à la fois les procédures et accompagner les personnes. La Grèce a déjà un certain nombre de centres, certains seront
Greece already has a number of different centres. Some of those will be fine and will be ready to carry out that role.
Le mot de détention qu'a utilisé Eleonora de Reactive n'est pas exact. Il s'agit de zones d'attente et toutes les formes de restriction de liberté, y compris les plus faibles, peuvent être utilisées. Je pense par exemple à l'assignation à résidence, qui, si l'autorité nationale l'estime, peut être tout à fait suffisante pour des familles qui sont en cours de procédure, qui sont demandeurs et qui, je le rappelle, très majoritairement ne posent aucun problème s'agissant de questions de sécurité. Donc, cette question de la détention, je sais qu'elle est au centre des inquiétudes des ONG. C'est pour cela que je m'engage moi-même à poursuivre le dialogue avec elle à ce sujet, pour que les solutions se construisent les unes après les autres et que la gestion se fasse sur le terrain de manière la plus humaine possible, avec de toute façon comme contre-pouvoir ce monitoring qui est dans les textes.
And with monitoring, which is something we've been trying to detect.
Yes, I would like to thank Eleonora Vázquez for the question raised by Euroactive. Yes, there is a triple choice of crisis situation assumptions, crisis, force majeure, and instrumentalization. But when it comes to instrumentalization, the reference to non-state actors has been corrected by the European Parliament. It is referred exclusively and only to hostile non-state actors. And there is a recital making absolutely sure that it will be no grounds, absolutely no grounds for targeting NGOs, particularly humanitarian NGOs, who are absolutely excluded of the instrumentalization response. Having said this, I will add this consideration. Instrumentalization was not in the mandate of the European Parliament, but it is only clear that it was a request, an insistent request, an unconditional request by a relevant number of member states represented in the Council through their governments. And you know what? This is what playing the European game is about. No one is on its own. This European Parliament happens to be the only directly elected democratic institution in the European architecture. And precisely because of it, it's a pluralistic body. We are 700. And you know what? For 40 years, 44 now, it's been directly elected, and no political group has had ever majority to adopt any legislation first reading on its own. It has always requested a combination of political groups summing up compromises. To begin with in the European Parliament, but then comes the conversation with the Council. And you see 27 member states around the table, and they make it clear that for them it's absolutely unconditional to put in place some request of them which was not in our mandate. It is in their mandate. That is the case of instrumentalization. Some member states found instrumentalization absolutely essential for the compromise we've reached. But we have corrected that request by making sure that by no means it will be aiming to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, particularly humanitarian NGOs involved in search and rescue. It will be facilitators of hostile non-state actors. They were referring to some specific organizations which might be in your mind frame, needless to name them, but it's an assumption that is in their consideration and their concern, and that is why we have actually shaped it. But the lesson is clear. The lesson is that when you go the European game, it takes a lot of compromising. That is why whenever you come out from a negotiation so lengthy for 3 whole years, non-stop, relentless, we haven't wasted a single second. Working so hard, you have to come with positions which were not your own, so that you have some gain, you put some added value, you put something into it, And that is why I think every rapporteur and every negotiating team represented by every rapporteur has made throughout this lengthy, extremely cumbersome, extremely tiresome, extremely stressful negotiation. But we made it. So we're making a valid value. And just final point, again, on your what is the gain, what is the difference we're making. Think of the opposite. Think what it would have been that after 3 long years of lengthy, tiresome negotiations, we tell the people outside here, we tell our citizens, we tell our constituencies, you know what? We didn't make it at all. We didn't achieve anything. Nothing has been done after all of these years. That would be completely unacceptable as a European response. We made it, and that is a difference.
Please, Mr. Tobé, finally for your questions.
Yes, thank you. I think the question was asked, when will we see this fully implemented in full action? And to be quite clear with you, what we have achieved here today is a political agreement. And the phase that now will come is that we will actually have even more negotiations on the implementation. So if you're not tired of me already, we will meet even more, I would say, for many hours. But we are working around 2 years. But I think this will be outlined in the coming negotiations between us, and we might see that there can be different parts of the pact that can go before others. But of course, we want to have this fully implemented as soon as possible. But this is to be very open with you, the years that we are discussing at the moment. But we will have to negotiate this further also with Council. On the questions of, from I understand, as you know, the Council's position was to have a Commission recommendation for a Member State. This is now changed to a clear proposal. We don't have in this deal that this will be made public, but we are having an ongoing discussion with Council to make sure that the European Parliament will be informed immediately when it is sent to a Member State. So this is also part of ongoing discussion.
Okay, we need to wrap it here. I just to inform you that we have published a very detailed press release with information on these files, but also on the other 2 that are part of the package, Eurodac reform and screening regulation. We will let the speakers go to their other commitments and to rest. We send you a very good day and an excellent holiday.
Thank you for your attendance and for your questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being so kind. Bye now.
When are you flying?
What a job.
When are you flying?
Right now.
We send you a very good day and an excellent holiday.
Thank you for your attendance and for your questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being so kind. Bye now.
Thank you.